Olá, então estamos ao vivo aqui pelo YouTube, pelo Facebook da Sociedade, da revista, e nós hoje temos o prazer de convidar uma professora que também se tornou amiga nossa aqui da Sociedade, que é a professora Francesca Brencio, e ela é assistente do Departamento de Filosofia na Universidade de Sevilha, na Espanha, e instrutora no Fenolab, também dessa universidade. Hoje, a professora irá falar de um artigo que ela publicou em nossa revista, cujo título, então, é Mind Our Words, Language and War Metaphor in the COVID-19. Essa apresentação nós faremos em inglês, mas as perguntas que vocês quiserem fazer podem ser feitas em português e nós traduzimos, então, para a professora e para a professora responder ao final da apresentação. Também ficará gravada essa entrevista e vocês poderão assistir a qualquer momento no nosso canal. Tudo bem? So, Professor Francesca, welcome. It's a pleasure for us, you to stay with us tonight. And we think that it's going to be lovely to hear from you this wonderful thematic. Okay.
Hi, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Flavio, and thank you, Daniela, for your kind invitation, for being here at this meeting, and also for the opportunity to publish in your journal my contribution.
Thank you very much.
I'm honored. It's really my honor and my pleasure to be with you this evening. And I prepared a PowerPoint presentation, so I'm going to share the screen now. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Yes, the topic I will present this evening is mainly grounded on the contribution I published in your journal. The title is Mind Your Words, Language and Word Metaphors in the COVID-19 pandemic. And basically, this is the outline of what I would like to talk with you this evening. Basically, the presentation is grounded on 4 main points. How language and metaphors guide our understanding of reality in general. What kind of language is used to describe and to understand the COVID-19 pandemic? Then I would like to address briefly what kind of language and metaphors are used usually in medicine, and why I think we need better words and metaphors to think and to act better. So let's start with the first part of the presentation. Words are considered among the first tools human beings use. They're born as sounds, imperfect and repetitive sounds that toddlers pronounce, and gradually, in accordance with their cognitive development, they become proper words. Words and language are the precious elements upon which culture, in particular Western culture, is grounded. The very simplified passage from a mythos to logos, often quoted as the moment of transition from knowledge to reasoning, and consider also the occasion of the birth of philosophy, says something about the importance of words for Western civilization. Logos means not only reason, but also word, speech, discourse. And perhaps this is one reason, among many others, why rhetoric, the art of using words effectively, was so important in education in ancient times. We cannot imagine the Greek old literature, for example, without words, neither Shakespeare's play. We cannot picture an important part of the opera without words, neither our ordinary life and common gestures each of us perform when we ask a very simple question or pass by an information. Words are fundamental elements in our way of talking, communicating, exchanging information, getting into relationships, but they are not confined only to these. Philosophically speaking, words are not things, neither merely tools. The tendency to represent words according to the common principle of their use is an habit rooted in our culture and does not highlight sufficiently how words are window into the world. Words' ability to signify things is the consequence of their more original ability to unveil relationships and behaviors. The famous dictum of Ludwig Wittgenstein, the limits of my language mean the limits of my word, addresses the relationship between our ability to use language and to provide meaning. This sentence should be a compass in conceiving and using language, since the way in which we think and talk shapes the way in which we live and act. Put it differently, we are able to properly name our emotions, feelings, thoughts, gestures, according to our ability to know and master the right words. If we want to take a step further, we can say that Wittgenstein's motto is helpful to show the link between our behaviors and relationship with the language. The limits of language and word are a kind of mirror of how we think, how we act, how we express emotions. Words unveil our relationship with the alterity, regardless if this other is a person, an object, a non-human, more in general, the world. In other words, language situates us in a word and discloses the possibility of being toward the others. Put it differently, our behavior is not only the result of a complex relationship between personal experiences, education, shared values, and social practices. It's also a relationship with linguistic patterns. In their original founding activity, words disclose the word for the human ability of dwelling into the word, as Martin Heidegger says. It means not merely to live into the word, but also to protect it and cherish it, shaping also the meaning we aim to provide it. Perhaps now it's clear why words are more than means of information. They contribute to the formation of identity, both personal and collective. They carry values, encourage practices, and nourish social emotions. Similarly, metaphors play a cardinal role in our everyday life, not just in language, but in thought and action. Our ordinary conceptual system, in terms of which we both think and act, is fundamentally metaphorical in nature. Metaphors are not confined to poetical language. Rather, they inform our conceptual system and shape it accordingly. They possess and manifest a certain coherence with our culture and its values. Words and metaphors are not only signs that we employ in our ordinary way of using language, they have significance as relations. Words are the tool that open the door for relationships, but also for unveiling the meaning of experiences and our place within them. As such, language is not a tool in the same sense of a chair, a desk, a pen. It's not only something which unveils only actions and goals. Rather, it shows how we see things, how we see situations, how we see events. Language unveils our social landscapes, describing a geography of values, beliefs, and practices. And particularly important is the fact that language can unveil the relationship with the fear and anguish. The role of language in this is a central topic both in a philosophical and a clinical literature. It deals with the issue of speaking about the unspeakable in order not only to name it, but moreover to signify and make understandable what otherwise is not. Somehow, language also attempts to unveil the uncanny, which is at the core of every experience of anguish, providing different names to designate what someone saws through this experience. In the current COVID-19 pandemic, it's very interesting to observe what kind of language is used because it plays an important role. In fact, the use of language in public communication is a fragile element. It is more than a means of sharing information. Rather, it carries values, impact on both personal and social behaviors, encourages practices, and nourish social emotions, and defines clinical practices. What kind of language is used to describe and to understand the COVID-19 pandemic? Since it began, the narrative around the COVID-19 pandemic is strongly influenced by the war terminology and military metaphors, as the commentary published in The Atlantic entitled "The Case Against Waging War on the Coronavirus" show. By choosing to frame the pandemic in military terms, governments are clearly trying to communicate the gravity of this public health crisis, one that requires the type of state of intervention and personal sacrifice most nations have not experienced in peacetime. But drawing this imperfect parallel can have the unintended consequences of causing fear and panic too. In this scenario, politicians declare themselves at war, fighting an invisible enemy, and healthcare workers who are in direct contact with people infected by the coronavirus are said to be heroes fighting on the front lines. This might have a negative effect at this kind of language and metaphors, may instill fear and anxiety in health workers and in society as a whole. A feeling of powerlessness, of not being up to the task, or of losing the battle is the consequence of this use of metaphors. These emotions add to the higher pressure that healthcare workers are already under, and it shows how this language is useless in terms of the moral decision they are required to take. The proper use of metaphors may morally and psychologically injure health workers. This stands in stark contrast with what is at the heart of healthcare professions, namely care and compassion. Healthcare workers rarely see themselves as heroes, as this should be recorded daily. It seems to me that what is fundamental is that politicians and the media support them by putting forward the values of care, compassion, and solidarity instead of describing their work as that of heroes fighting battles. It is clear that the COVID-19 pandemic affects every health worker In response to this crisis, for example, surgeons are being forced to shift from patient-centered ethics to public health ethics. This shift, which has occurred in multiple ways, inevitably causes moral distress. Many healthcare providers are forced to consider what their true ethical responsibilities are due to situations such as cancelling surgeries for people who needed those operations, needing to choose which operations to proceed and which can wait, having to choose whether to withhold chemotherapy for life-threatening cancer because it may suppress the immune system and increase the susceptibility to a COVID infection, and facing the scarcity of personal protective equipment and the risk of contracting the virus. From this perspective, it becomes clear that war narratives do not add anything to the infected or those who are treating them. It is precisely in these very sensitive times that we need safety, care, and solidarity as values and pathways to get through the pandemic. If language is a mirror of how we think and act, the word jargon employed with reference to the current state of pandemic in every form of communication shows many aspects of our society and raises many questions. Is word terminology helpful? It is correct emphasizing the parallels between the COVID-19 pandemic and war. There are some obvious parallels. In one way or another, the pandemic impacts our life. And just like war, we perceive a tangible risk of losing our lives, our loved one, our livelihood, homes, financial security, or of the above. Similar to a war, healthcare systems around the world are confronted with a demand that greatly exceeds their capacities. However, it's curious that word narrative has spread more widely and faster than other possible narratives. From the many other possible choices, it is the word narrative that speaks to society at many levels. As a result of this overwhelming and intoxicating narrative, there is a high tendency of not fulfilling responsibilities. Like in the worst scenario, where ordinary people are not responsible for the war, no one seems to be responsible for the contagion, even if this is false, since each of us is responsible for his or her behavior in terms of personal and social choices. In fact, contrary to a worst scenario, responsibility and freedom cannot be separated in the pandemic. The most evident outcomes of this situation is that there are no winners or losers, no enemies or allies. This way of thinking and speaking is a mere result of an ideological propaganda spread in many countries across the globe. It seems to me that the pandemic unveils how solidarity and empathy are significant experiences that allow the appreciation of difference, contributing to the struggle against stigma and urging us to question the nature of our identities and values. In this way, solidarity and empathy are precious tools to investigate who we are. They allow for the emergence of a space in which more ethical relationships between humans can develop and can involve also non-humans and the environment and their mutual belonging. As social animals, it is precisely in moments like these that our ability to be in dialogue with others becomes a priority. Emphasizing this through the language we use may help to encourage responsible social behaviors that also support our mental health and limit the spread of the virus. Isolation and quarantine measures do not only affect our mental health and the way in which we live in these times, but also affect our relationship with death. Mortality and human vulnerability have become more present and tangible in our lives. Because of the social measures, many people infected with the coronavirus die alone, maybe not far away from their homes, but without the comfort of their family and loved ones. As visitors are often not allowed in hospitals, there is a real human tragedy unfolding before our eyes. Death, one of the most intimate events in human life, is now deprived of its social aspect. In some countries, for months, funerals were not organized. Mourning loved ones in the cemetery was not possible, and finding solace in the presence of others was not allowed. In these times of hardship, facing our own vulnerability, we need the comfort of social interaction, even though the contact needs to happen at a physical distance to prevent further infections. Physical distance is not synonym for social distance. We are required to redefine a social closeness or interaction in being physically distant, a challenge which involves our own experience of the body, our intercorporeality, and our interaffectivity. My idea is that instead of word terminology that points at an invisible enemy, we need a narrative that reminds us all of our responsibility, both in personal and social behaviors, to limit the spread of the virus and to help those in need. To overcome the global pandemic and its devastating effects, we need solidarity, a valued opposite to word terminology. The quest for solidarity in this pandemic is urgent, and we have seen an incredible worldwide effort at solidarity in the last year. China sent protective gear to Europe, German hospitals took in French and Italian patients, Cuban doctors traveled to Europe to help their colleagues in Italy, as well as Russian and Albanian teams. This solidarity is the very root of social life. Social life entails solidarity, and if we want to take a step further, solidarity entails altruism. This quest for solidarity in the age of COVID-19 unveils the double nature of empathy. Empathy provides us with a sense of ontological rootedness, not because it restores in us an illusory sense of lost fullness, but because it does precisely the opposite. It unsettles us ontically, and it grounds us ontologically in truth, which is at the basis of our ethical life. Conceived as a fissure into shared values and beliefs, empathy allows the understanding and appreciation of differences, and at the same time, the possibility for demolishing stigma in every situation, and also in the context of the coronavirus, paving the way for compassion and solidarity. The fear of being infected is not only a concern perceived by health workers, but also by people in general. The development of a proper phobia can affect behaviors, both individual and social, close to the obsessive one. It is in this hypertrophic region of fears and concerns that stigma and discrimination can occur when people associate a disease such as COVID-19 with a population or a nationality, even though not everyone in that population or from that region is specifically at risk of contracting the disease, as tragically we have recently seen with a massive wave of hate against Asian people. But what kind of language and metaphors are usually used in medicine? And what is their relationship with the issue of stigma? Stigma can occur also when a person has been released from quarantine, even though he is not considered a risk for spreading the virus to others. Discrimination can also affect emergency responders or healthcare professionals. Through stigma and discrimination, an individual or group of individuals is disqualified from full social acceptance, and the risk of a process of self-stigmatization is implicated into this perverse dialect. The relationship between a diagnosis and a stigma, which is a big issue for every diagnosis, is particularly evident in the context of current pandemic. And the diagnosis of coronavirus may lead to the consolidation of a stigma around the person who received the examination, as for example happens in the BEM population, who are at a significantly higher risk of developing and dying from COVID-19. This displays the social and economic differences among people, dismantling the rhetoric that claims that the virus is a great equalizer for social justice. The poor can be disproportionately affected by quarantine in ways that may not be visible to people in relatively privileged conditions. It's also important to stress the movement from a private subjective experience of illness to objectify disease, which constituted to be experienced as symptoms by the ill person. And this is a significant transition in the case of the coronavirus. The illness, quoting Abby Carroll, is no longer a private musing on the nature of an expected bodily change, but an item in medical vocabulary and ontology to which shared meanings and knowledge are attached. One of the recent recommendations of the United Nations, in accordance with the World Health Organization policy, is to recognize that although the COVID-19 crisis is, in the first instance, a physical health one, it has the seeds of a major global mental health crisis. The pandemic may affect mental health through its potential direct and indirect impacts on existential feelings, anguish, fear, and anxiety, which are emotions that are able to undermine our ordinary life. The measures to limit the contagion, such as physical distancing and the damage to the global economy, cause emotional distress and an increase in mental health issues, such as depression and anxiety. Sometimes mental distress manifests as a physical or behavioral symptoms, such as sleep disturbances, loss of gain of appetite, and irritability. In people with pre-existing mental health issues, the pandemic has intensified this. Anxiety disorders become more vivid, and there is now a concrete existential threat. Hopelessness about the situation, and especially its uncertain outcome, exacerbates depression. In the current pandemic, we experience not only fear of being infected, of being hospitalized, of being intubated, of being in intensive care, of dying, but also anguish and anxiety, both as individual manifestations and collective ones. An infection with the coronavirus is not only, in fact, also a personal experience, but it can be transformed into a collective trauma, which involves a society at many levels. The transition from personal experience to personal trauma of the COVID-19 is very important, both for its social and healing implications. When a trauma enters into someone's life, everything changes, both in a personal and collective dimension. The current pandemic shares important features with other collective traumas beyond the individual person's control, ranging from existential feelings such as anxiety about that and psychosomatic responses to more severe psychiatric presentations. The process that begins with a collective trauma transforms challenging experiences into a collective memory and culminates in a shared system of meaning conveyed through language that allows groups to redefine who they are and what they experience along this journey. Through language and narrative, a collective memory persists beyond lives of the direct survivors of the virus. Why we need better words and better metaphors to think and act better. The use of metaphor for describing disease is common in the larger reception of clinical terms, but throughout the 19th century, disease metaphors become more virulent and demagogic. In her book entitled Metaphor, Illness as Metaphor, Susan Sontag wrote, "Illness is the night side of life, a more onerous citizenship. Everyone who is born holds a dual citizenship, in the kingdom of the well and the kingdom of the sick. Although we all prefer to use only the good passport, sooner or later each of us is obliged, at least for a spell, to identify ourselves as the citizens of that other place." Modern disease metaphors specify as an ideal of society's well-being, analogized to physical health, that is as anti-political as it is the call for a new political order. The language of treatment evolves from military metaphors of aggressive warfare to metaphors featuring the body's natural defenses. But metaphors are not just poetic ornament or rhetorical flourish. They are also deeply embedded in our language and they often go unnoticed. When we use metaphor at the same time, we are shaped by metaphors. And they play an essential role in the process of understanding atmospheres which surround the pre-reflexive nature of the experience. Metaphors do not pin down atmospheres, rather, they enhance atmospheres, amplifying them and linking other metaphors. In the attempt to get closer to the truth of experience, they enable a self-sustaining process of understanding and experiencing one kind of thing in terms of another, which has been considered, for example, by Lakoff and Johnson as the basis of our everyday conceptual system. Put it differently, we don't simply talk with metaphors, we think through metaphors. Metaphoric thinking generates and regenerates meaning in an impermanent task of describing and redescribing that is truthful to the unfinished nature of atmosphere. It was Ernest Cassirer who suggested that human nature can only be approached by a long way over lived symbols, metaphors, and linguistic interpretation of the being in the world. Metaphors guide our search of meaning in life in a way which can be more or less evident. Man lives not only in a physical world, but also in a symbolic universe, in which language, myth, art, and religion are part and constitute the symbolic and tangled web of a human experience. The search for meaning in life is revealed to the expressible use of the metaphors. We do not use metaphors and narratives. Rather, we embody them. Bodily metaphors write out of the embodied nation of our emotions. The relationship between emotions and language through metaphors is characterized by an hermeneutical dialect. On one hand, emotions are shaped by language conventions, which contribute to our conscious understanding and a conceptualization of emotions themselves. On the other hand, emotions are parts of our intersubjectively shared bodily physiology, providing the basis for mutual understanding among humans by shaping our language with emotion based metaphors, which change from culture to culture. Metaphors can also evoke physical sensations in our mind, as recent findings shows. Our brains think using metaphors, and when art gives us new metaphors, it could also be giving a new way of thinking, as well as to build memory. Language in the current scenario has changed, and this has altered the lives of billions of people, and it has led to the production of a new vocabulary encompassing specialist terms from the field of epidemiology and medicine. New acronyms and words to express the societal imperatives of imposed isolation and distancing. The metaphors we choose can thus dramatically impact people's perception in the way that have cognitive, behavioral, and physical consequences, and may reinforce cultural stereotypes. It is through metaphors that we reveal ourselves, both as individuals and as a society. And it is precisely through the choices of metaphors that we depict the world as we see it, unveiling our value and our ethics. In her book entitled The Robber Bride, Margaret Atwood wrote that war is what happens when language fails. To me, it seems that it fails twice if we are not able to dismantle our jargon in these sensitive times. Thank you for your attention.
Well, Francesca, thank you for your wonderful presentation. Would you like to say that if the questions are open, we can write them down on the on Facebook or YouTube, and we can discuss with Francesca now any kind of comments or questions.
Professor, okay.
Oh, you can say
You can start. You
Yes.
can start, then I ask. Okay.
Yes. Yes. Francesca, while we were speaking, I was thinking about how it's hard today to share point of views about the pandemic or other situations related with pandemic. One example that I can easily give you, it's personal example that I have a child, and we were in a kind of discussion in her school and all of the other schools, the impact of having the schools closed, as well the impact of fear for the education professionals, the teachers, to work in the school. And I always have the feeling in this kind of argument that we were in battlefields. Like the one side, the parents would like to have the children at school because they feel that their children are suffering and are going to have mental health issues. And the other side, the teachers are people who are in the side of the teachers, of the educational professionals, that are against to have the schools open. So it's an example that while we're speaking, I was remembering, like, I have always the feeling when we're trying to talk with them, talking like sometimes as a mediator, that I can empathize with the fear of the teachers as well. I can empathize with the fear of the parents, and the both sides are at the same time right. But it's a hard decision to taking at any moment. But it's impossible to listen for any side. And when you try to mediate any kind of argument, it's impossible, or it's the situation push you to choose a side in a battle, or you are against, or you are not against.
Yes, this is something that I think more in general can happen in ordinary life. But in the context of a pandemic, perhaps things are more exacerbated, as whereas personal feelings, expectations, social expectations too. The tendency of being from one side of the barricade instead of the other side of the barricade, I think is also a result of both a political issue, which is how each country has decided to manage the pandemic. And on the other side, it is also a result of an ideological propaganda. Because if we think that we are, each of us is against the other, we will never meet a point of peace, just to remain in this metaphor of war and peace. We'll continue to struggle one against the other, and to provide arguments which are just an argument against another argument, which is okay in terms of personal growth, but for something so important as the example you provide us, the school, open or closed, it has an important impact, not also in the family managed, but also in children, in adolescents, in teenagers, because somehow they are deprived of what does it mean to be at school physically, with your body, with your embodied attention, with your willing to make jokes among each other. You have to stay at school, but from distance. And in this distance, everything is changing. So I see your point when you say we are in the situation of getting into conflict between parents and teachers. Somehow I sense that this is also a result of this way of explaining what the pandemic is and how to find a proper solution to manage this situation, which is unexpected, because I think nobody was expected in 2020 to face the pandemic. But at the same time, it unveils how we need to be united not only as humans and humans, humans and the environment, united across the borders, beyond nationalities, because the pandemic can affect everybody.
Yes. So another question that I have, it's you show us how in that schema how language and make change our feelings. What I was thinking in that slide was how language can improve our responsibility in that way. So how language can shape our feelings and then making us more responsible of our acts.
This is the challenge.
Yeah.
I think we are more or less educated to speak, to talk, to exchange information, to have good performances. Also in this context, I'm doing a performance. But getting in dialogue is something different. And to get in dialogue with each other, we need to find the right and the proper words who can encourage us to act in a more responsible way, to be more open toward the other, even if perhaps my neighbor is infected by coronavirus. Perhaps the first reaction is to barricade myself and my family into my house and don't get in touch with his neighbor. But then I have to start to think, is my neighbor in need of something? May I somehow help him without getting in contact, direct contact? But somehow, may I provide some kind of help? Also to say, look, I'm here. If you need something, I'm here as your neighbor. This is what the word neighbor means. I'm close to you. I'm near to you. And to find the right word, to be more responsible in order to get in dialogue, it means also shape a different identity, a different vocabulary of emotions, because words impact our emotions, and our emotions have a profound resonance with our body, and this affects our ability to think. So I see this kind of circularity. The way in which we talk affects the way in which we think, we act, we live, we stay in the world. We choose a place in which way we want to stay in this place. So finding the proper word to act in a more responsible way means also to go and search for all this kind of pre-knowledge, prejudices, bias we have as individuals, but also as member of a community, embedded into a certain culture, into a certain word, and each of us, in a more conscious or unconscious way, carry on this kind of background. So if I want to say something, who invite me at first and the other in second place to act in a more responsible way, I have to look and see beyond my back and see my culture, my education, my experience, my word, and try to find out how to manage to find the right words to say. So it's not that easy. It's not only a matter of being able to talk in a polite, kind, and educated way. No, absolutely not. It's something more radical. It's an existential attitude, not only a linguistic performance.
Great.
Another point that I'd like to listen you about it. It's this pandemic era has brought light to a situation that we thought that human beings could act better because now we have more knowledge about disease, more knowledge about virus, more knowledge about pandemic states, but more knowledge about medicine, and sometimes we see situations that seems that people lack the ability to think about and to share knowledge because they lost the ability to share knowledge through the words, and maybe as a existential this existential proposition that we should find the right words to share emotions or to share what we would like to expose. We could think also that you should share the ways to explain or the ways to share knowledge through words, but which kind of words? Because sometimes we have the impression that if you give the other knowledge or if you give the other information, if you give the other enough data about something, the other is going to be responsible for that and act about with this information. But we should also think like which kind of word you should use to share this information. You should share the knowledge to make the possibility to have an empathetic reaction.
Well, I think that the point you raise is fundamental. I'm thinking in the back of my mind, I have this issue of the fake news. It's a very cool topic. So, well, I would say that, of course, there are different levels to convey information. For example, if I go to a Congress of Philosophy, I have to maintain a certain vocabulary in order to discuss and to talk with my colleagues. If I go in a different meeting, in a different context in which I'm requested to talk about my job with a public who is not expert, I have to adjust my background, my knowledge to the public. In other words, I am required to simplify it, but trying to express complex concepts in a simple language is always a risk, because the risk is that you are going to make banal arguments or topics that are not banal at all. So perhaps the point is to convey, to provide information in a very clear way, grounded on some kind of evidences. And the manipulation of information, the manipulation of knowledge because of political goals, as we have observed in the last years across the world, has been a big problem, because politicians have a huge responsibility for their job, but they are not scientists, and they should trust people who do their job in order to convey the right information to the big audience, the population, in a clear way, but at the same time in a serious way. So it's a challenge to put these two things together. But I also find that there is this mutual responsibility between the political context and the scientific one. And the population, us, who stay in the middle, are requested to be informed in a serious way, in a rigorous way, but also with clear words, starting from the assumption that scientists are required to do their job and politicians to take decisions accordingly to what science can say us, can convey us.
Professor, I have another question, a little provocative one. What other or a better narrative do you propose? What kind of a narrative do you think it should be more, more, I don't know the word, but better than this, better than the war? Yeah.
I would say there was a philosopher, if I'm not wrong, Rosa Luxemburg, who said that the first revolutionary act in the history of human beings is to call things with their real name. So being able to provide things, situation, events, relationships in general, their real name, their true name, it's a very revolutionary act. I also believe that the word narrative and the word metaphors is a result of a certain way of conceiving politics, because it's the direct manifestation of how dangerous can be a situation, in this case, the pandemic. And on the other hand, it gives the taste of what kind of efforts are required to overcome the pandemic. So if the aim at the core of this narrative could be in good faith, the effects that provokes are not that positive. So perhaps we should change the window from which we see things. We should change the gaze through which we see things and educate people to a different scale of values. I don't think that frontline workers, as I wrote in my paper, consider themselves as heroes. They just do their job daily, despite the pandemic.
Yeah.
And it's important to recognize them clapping their hands or showing particularly important gestures of solidarity. But I'm wondering if we will be able to recall, to remind ourselves with all these things when the pandemic will be ended. If we will be able not to yell to the first nurse we will meet in the hospitals, also only because we have to sit and wait a bit longer. I'm wondering if we will be able to take a good lesson of this situation in terms of providing the national health system of every country with what is needed for these people to do their job, not only during the pandemic, I repeat myself, but daily in an ordinary context of emergency. So educating ourselves, when we say the others, no, I am the other. So starting from educating myself to a different scale of values, putting priority on what is required for society at any levels, in terms of benefits for these people to do their job at the best of their possibilities in terms of protective equipments, not stress level or hours of works, different possibility to have different shift. It's just the beginning. So I think this could be a pathway, perhaps not the only one, but this could be certainly a pathway. I also think that each of us has a profound debt with all these people across the world, even if we are not touched directly by the pandemic, by the corona crisis. Each of us have a debt, and perhaps the pandemic has only unveiled this debt. But we have to keep memories of this when all the situation will be ended. So perhaps at that moment will not be enough to clap our hands, to express our recognitions, gratitude to healthcare workers at any levels.
Perfect. Okay.
Well, we are on time. We have to finish our meeting today.
Yeah.
But at the first place, I'd like really thank you, say that we're really honored, and thank you for the time sharing your thoughts with us.
It was my pleasure.
No, that's wonderful. It was really enlightening for us. And I hope that we have more opportunities. And I also hope that we can find better narratives and better metaphors.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Daniela. Thank you, Flavio, for having me as your guest this evening and for the opportunity to contribute to your journal with this work of mine. And I'm very looking forward to stay in touch with you. And yes, perhaps in the future, we will be able also to find these good words to think better and to act better. This is our duty, at least.
And to create a better environment and situation.
Definitely.
Yes.
Definitely. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Francesca.
Have a nice evening. Stay safe.
Yes.
Stay healthy.
And we hope to see you personally.
Why not?
In a not so long future.
Yes.
Why not?
And
why not? Yes, in person.
In person, yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening. See you soon.
Thank you very much and have a nice day. Good
night.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Muito bonitinha, né?